Hey everybody, what can the longest time prophecy in the Bible teach us about the second coming of Jesus? Welcome to The Lamp, illuminating your way with the light of God's Word. I'm Tom Stone. In this video, we're talking about Daniel chapter 9 and the longest time prophecy in the Bible. So let's get right into it. In this series, we've already covered that Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8 are all parallel visions of the future of Earth's history from Daniel's standpoint. Daniel has a vision in chapter 8. The angel Gabriel comes and interprets the vision to him except for one part. Although the angel interpreted everything else, before this is interpreted, Daniel fainted and was sick for days. He says, "Afterward I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it." In Daniel 2, there was a dream and then a full explanation of the dream. In Daniel 7, there was a vision and a full explanation. But in Daniel 8, there was a vision and only a partial explanation. Now, many years passed, and finally the happenings that are written in Daniel chapter 9 take place. Even though other things took place, such as the fall of Babylon that Daniel writes about in the book of Daniel, he puts that to one side of the Bible and puts it in its place, but then he takes Daniel 8 and 9 and puts them right next to each other. And here we learn what Daniel is doing in the first year of the reign of King Darius. He's reading from the writings of Jeremiah, and he says, "I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of the years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet." Now just hold on to that word, debar, for just a couple minutes. But Daniel understood what was written in this word of the Lord. 70 years are determined. Daniel was in exile in Babylon. Medo-Persia came and took over, and there he is. He understood that after 70 years, the exiles could return and they could go back to their homeland and rebuild their city. So now here's Daniel reading the book, and he understands it. He starts to pray. He's praying to God. He's confessing the sins of the people. He's asking God for his mercy. And then, right in the middle of his prayer, Gabriel shows back up again to give him understanding. Daniel says, "Yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering. And he informed me and talked with me and said, 'O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you skill to understand.'" Finally, Daniel can understand the thing that he didn't understand at the end of chapter 8. He can understand the vision. Now, I've got to share something with you about languages. You already know this, but you may not think about it when you're reading English translation of the Bible. If I said to my buddies, "I love you guys," it would mean something different than if I said to my son, "I love you, honey." And that would mean something different than if I said to my wife, "I love you." And it might even mean something different than if I said to my grandmother, for instance, "Grandma, I love you." The same word can have multiple meanings, and we understand that. But when we're reading an English version, we may have one word that actually comes from multiple Hebrew or multiple Greek words. In Greek, there are multiple words for love. You would say to your friends, "I phileo you." That's a friendship kind of love, like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. But you'd say to your son or your daughter, "I storge you." This is a fatherly or a motherly love. You'd say to your husband or your wife, "I eros you." And then we have God's love, this perfect agape love. Now check this out from the Bible. In John 21, Jesus is sitting with his disciples on the seashore. He's speaking to Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times before his crucifixion. Now Jesus is restoring him, and he asks Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says, "You know I love you, Lord." "Yes, of course." And then Jesus asks him a second time, do you love me? And then Peter says, yes, of course, you know I love you. And then a third time, Jesus asks, do you love me? And we read that Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And Peter said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Why was Peter saddened? Because Jesus asked him 3 times? Why do you got to keep asking me this, Jesus? I know I denied you, but yes, I love you. I'm sorry. You know I love you. It makes sense. And you can read it that way. But when you read it in the Greek, something different happens. Jesus says to Peter, do you agape me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I phileo you. In other words, do you love me with that perfect love? And Peter can't answer and say yes. He has to say, yes, Lord, you know I love you like a brother. Again, Jesus asks him, do you agape me? And Peter has to say, Lord, you know I phileo you. I love you like a brother. And the third time, Jesus doesn't ask him again, do you agape me? Instead, he says, do you phileo me? And this is why Peter gets upset. Not because Jesus asked him 3 times, but because the third time Jesus didn't ask him, do you agape me? Instead, he lowered the standard in a way. He said, do you phileo me? And Peter's grieved. And he says, Lord, you know all things. You know I phileo you. You know I love you like a brother. What a story. There's so much more depth, so much more understanding when we can find out what is actually being said in the original language. And the same's true with Daniel as well. Check this out. In verses 1 and 2, we hear him say this chazon. I saw a chazon. I saw in the chazon. So whatever we're reading in Daniel chapter 8, we know that it's a chazon. It's a vision. But there's another Hebrew word that we simply translate as vision as well. It's the word mare. Gabriel says to Daniel in verse 26, and the vision, in other words, the mare of the evenings and the mornings, which was told is true, therefore seal up the chazon, for it refers to many days in the future. So there's this vision in Daniel chapter 8, this chazon, but then there's also this vision, this mare of the 2300 days, the evenings and the mornings. Gabriel tells him that the mare is true, but then Daniel says that he fainted and was sick for days afterward. He says, I was astonished by the mare, but no one understood it. We don't see this in English. Daniel is calling the whole vision a chazon. And then there's this other part of the vision that he did not understand, and it's called the mare. He calls it something different. This part that he saw, he didn't understand. So while Daniel is praying, Gabriel comes to him, the same one who came in the first chazon. He informed Daniel and talked with him and said, "Oh, Daniel, I have come forth to give you skill and understanding." Now, here's where that word dabar comes in, because I asked you to hold on to it. Remember when he was reading in the book of Jeremiah, right at the beginning of Daniel 9, he says, I understood the matter, right? I understood the dabar. What didn't Daniel understand? The mare. He didn't understand the vision. There was no other vision between the end of Daniel 8 and here in 9:21 or so. There's nothing else Daniel didn't understand except this mare. Now look at the Hebrew and what Gabriel says to Daniel. He says, consider the dabar and understand the mare. In other words, consider, think about Jeremiah's prophecy and understand the vision about the 2300 days. So let's do that. From Daniel chapter 8, we already know there are 2300 years, and at the end of that time, the sanctuary will be cleansed. Whatever that means, whenever it starts, Daniel doesn't know, he doesn't understand. But Gabriel explains it by giving Daniel another time prophecy. He says 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. There's a lot going on in this verse, and it's all going to take place during this 490-year period of time, the 70 weeks. So Gabriel says 70 weeks are determined for your people. That word determined can mean determined, it can mean cut off. This portion, this 70 weeks, this 490 years is apportioned for your people. After this second time prophecy, Gabriel tells Daniel again, understand these things. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. Without going into depth about what all of that means, because this video is about the second coming of Jesus, when did this decree take place? Nehemiah tells us that King Artaxerxes wrote a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in the 20th year of his reign in the month of Nisan. Nehemiah said to the king, if it please the king, let letters be given to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give the timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel which pertain to the temple for the city wall. So now we know what's happening at the beginning of the vision. We've got this decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So let's put that in our timeline. Right here, stretching from the Medo-Persian Empire down through Rome. Let's take a look at what's happening here. So we've got our 2,300 days, or literal years, and 490 of those years are determined for the Jews. This vision starts somewhere in the middle of the 5th century BC. You might have a little bit different calculation, I know different people do, but somewhere right in here this decree is given, and this is the time of the start of the prophecy. So let's find out when the allotted time of the Jews is finished. Remember that in a regular mathematical timeline, there is a 0. But when it comes to a historical timeline, there is no 0 because there was no year 0. So what that means is since everything shifted, take 457 and we add 490 years to it, we end up with 34 AD. This is the end of the 70 weeks, so we can put that right in our timeline. How many years are left? A quick mathematical calculation will give us 1,810 years left. So let's go back to our timeline and add 1,810 years, and we end up with 1844. So if we've done our math right, this prophecy begins somewhere in the middle of the 5th century BC and ends around 1844. Now to answer our question, what can this prophecy tell us about the second coming of Jesus? Everything that was told to us in Daniel chapter 2 in this basic outline, followed by Daniel chapter 7, followed again by Daniel chapter 8. Now this explanation in Daniel chapter 9 has happened, except Christ's kingdom has not come yet. I believe that it's going to happen soon. Why do I believe that? For many reasons. But one is because of what Daniel tells us right here in Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9. The time is getting close for Jesus to come.